Words of a martyred president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
There will always be dissident voices heard in the land, expressing opposition without alternatives, finding fault but never favor, perceiving gloom on every side, and seeking influence without responsibility. Those voices are inevitable. But today, other voices are heard in the land. Voices preaching doctrines wholly unrelated to reality. Doctrines which apparently assume that words will suffice without weapons, that vituperation is as good as victory, and that peace is a sign of weakness. We cannot expect that everyone will talk sense to the American people, but we can hope that fewer people will listen to nonsense, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men.
Words of a martyred president, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Words of warning against extremism and hate, taken from a speech he was to deliver in Dallas, Texas. Words he never uttered. Before he could, an assassin's bullet took his life. One fact is clear. Whatever pushed the mind of the assassin, hate pulled the trigger. And hatred, blind, bitter, savage hatred, the very hatred against which John F. Kennedy warned, blights the land. It surges forth from the distant fringes of our society, from the extreme right and from the extreme left, and it poisons the atmosphere of our political life. Hatred, in any form and from any source, is cancerous, and hatred is the stock in trade of the extremists. This is hate. A handbill passed out on the streets of Dallas, November 22nd, 1963, the day President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And this is hate. A full-page advertisement carried in the Dallas Morning News the same day. Why have you ordered your brother Bobby, the Attorney General, to go soft on communists? This, too, is hate. The Honorable Adlai Stevenson, American ambassador to the United Nations, hemmed in by hooting right-wing extremists. Violence erupts. And this, Dallas, 1960. Vice presidential candidate Lyndon B. Johnson and his wife harassed by extremists. But Dallas is not unique. Hate is epidemic. New York City. The Honorable Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States, is picketed. Members of a front group for the extremist John Birch Society hurled placards, leaflets, and insults at him. And Birmingham. 4 Negro children are killed in church by a bomb whose fuse was racial hatred. Extremism, hate. One breeds the other. And the far right and far left find a common camping ground in their extremism, their violence and lawlessness, and their contempt for democracy. Incidents like the attack on Stevenson, on Warren, on Johnson, don't just happen. Thousands of bumper stickers, publications, radio programs, years of frenzied agitation by extremist demagogues smearing the United Nations finally exploded into the attack on Stevenson. And hundreds of thousands of leaflets, billboards, and steady drumfire of slander and defamation, accusations that he and the Supreme Court favor communists, even charges that he and other justices are communists, led inevitably to the assault on Chief Justice Warren. Hatred, naked hatred in these incidents, separated by hundreds of miles, but united by common roots in right-wing extremist groups, well organized, growing, richly financed, stretching from Dallas to New York, from Seattle to St. Petersburg, from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, menacing the security of the trade union movement, subverting civil rights and civil liberties, threatening democracy. Today, right-wing groups number more than 3,000, claim more than 4 million members, and millions of unaffiliated fellow travelers. The right wing has manpower. Money, too. Lavish donations from big business amounting to more than $10 million annually from thousands of individuals who think they have found a cause. Profits from the sale of publications to zealous followers. All these pour an estimated $25 million a year into extremist treasuries. Let's examine some of these extremist groups, find out what they say, what they stand for, why they are a deadly threat to progress and to our free institutions. Start with the John Birch Society. More than 100,000 strong, bigger than many international unions. Income, $750,000 a year. Membership, militant, dedicated, growing, secret. Its leader, this man, Robert Welch. He calls former President Eisenhower a conscious, dedicated agent of the communist conspiracy. Says, democracy is a perennial fraud. Arouses his followers with statements like this. As of July 1st, 1960, our experts place the total communist influence over our national activities at a minimum of 40% of total control. In the Blue Book of the John Birch Society, Welch draws a sinister blueprint for action, commands Birchers to conceal themselves behind hundreds of fronts, to grab control of parent-teachers associations and other civic groups, to intimidate and purge liberal educators and school board members, to gag liberal clergymen. In the name of anti-communism, Welch orders Birchers to take a leaf out of the book of the American Communist Party to use communist tactics, infiltrating influence groups, then taking them over. In practice, the John Birch brand of Americanism divides communities, sets neighbor against neighbor, creates discord and suspicion. It even makes spies of school children. This episode, as reported in Life magazine, portrays a high school student, son of a John Birch Society member. On his father's instructions, he concealed a tape recorder inside a dummy textbook. He tried to trap his teacher into saying something the John Birch Society yardstick would measure as subversive. The aim, to get the teacher fired. The reason? She spoke favorably of the United Nations, assigned reading from liberal as well as conservative journals. This type of local fallout strikes countless American communities as a result of the explosion of hate and fear set off by the John Birch Society and other hate groups. Another key right-wing group, Americans for Constitutional Action. Two of its top 3 officers are also leaders in the John Birch Society. Politically aggressive, alert, effective. Its trained political workers swarm into the field in election years to help reactionary, anti-labor candidates for Congress. ACA distributes a voting index, awarding favorable ratings only to congressmen who oppose measures to improve Social Security, unemployment compensation, minimum wage, and all the other social welfare programs labor supports. These are the ACA heroes and how they rate on the voting records. Senator John Tower, Republican of Texas, 100%. Senator Barry Goldwater, Republican of Arizona, 99%. Senator Carl Curtis, Republican of Nebraska, 92%. But the ACA is bipartisan. It has Democratic heroes, too. Senator Harry Byrd, Democrat of Virginia, 94%. Senator A. Willis Robertson, Democrat of Virginia, 85%. Senator Strom Thurmond, Democrat of South Carolina, 86%. A roster of reaction. Next, Billy James Hargis and his so-called Christian Crusade. Hargis says, we are trying to take over both political parties. He attacks trade unions and union leaders, saying, In the majority of Union Convention resolutions, we see the Communist Party line followed closely and support of all unconstitutional socialistic schemes. He tells his followers, "When in doubt how to vote in an election, you will probably be right 99 times out of 100 if you vote opposite of the way advised by union bosses." An oil billionaire from Texas, H.L. Hunt, estimated income $140,000 a day, heads Lifelines Foundation, still another major factor in the extremist movement. Lifeline's propaganda, attacking the federal government, the public school system, labor, and other institutions, reaches into millions of American homes through publications and daily radio and television programs over 324 stations. The White Citizens Councils are another force battering at democracy's foundations, merchants of hate playing on racial fears and prejudices to peddle other extremist merchandise. What is this line of merchandise? What are the right-wing hate groups selling? Take one item, so-called right-to-work laws. Just as the destruction of free trade unions has marked the ascendancy of both fascist and communist dictatorships, so the destruction of free trade unions is a high priority goal of American extremists, and one route toward this goal is the open shop. Walking hand in hand with other extremist groups is the National Right to Work Committee. One of its founders, E.S. Dillard, is a high figure in the John Birch Society. Most of its leaders are intimately tied to other right-wing organizations. In Kansas, leadership of the state group which put over an open shop law in 1958 was almost identical with the statewide high command of the John Birch Society. In Wyoming, pressured by extremist leaders, the state legislature ran through a right-to-work law in less than 10 days without benefit of public hearings. Let's take a look at the rest of the program the hate groups are promoting. They say, impeach Earl Warren. The real purpose, not to impeach the Chief Justice, but to enfeeble the Supreme Court itself, to prevent the court from protecting the civil rights and civil liberties of our citizens, to block court action, giving city voters equality with rural citizens through fair apportionment of election districts. They say, repeal the federal income tax. What they really want is to kill the progressive features of the income tax, to soak the poor and relieve the rich. They say, clamp antitrust restrictions on trade unions, repeal the wage-protecting Walsh-Healy and Davis-Bacon Acts. What they really want is to smash unions, to turn back the clock to the good old days when the individual worker was completely at the mercy of his employer. They say, end federal farm programs. They say, get the government out of education, health, housing, and other progressive programs. They say, scuttle the Social Security program, wage and hour laws, unemployment compensation. The public schools, they cry, are breeding grounds for communism. Their program for education, censor textbooks, gag educators, stifle dissent, thought control. Remember him? They say, tear down the whole structure of social welfare Franklin D. Roosevelt helped to create. It adds up to a program to chain the federal government to the sidelines of American life and to throttle our democratic institutions. The extremists teach hate and distrust of the government and attack Washington as if it were a foreign power, an enemy to be defeated, rather than an instrument for the welfare of all of us. All this they demand in the name of anti-communism. They see internal communism as an immediate threat to take over the nation. John Birch Society leader Robert Welch claims, Our danger remains almost entirely internal, from communist influences right in our midst and treason right in our government. Reminds you of that old poem. Last night I saw upon the stair a little man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. Oh, how I wish he'd go away. The extremists, too, see little men who are not there. Everywhere they look, they see communists in control, in the government, in the schools, in the clergy, in labor, in the mass media of communications. Yet J. Edgar Hoover, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, says, "The cause of communism is well served by the hate-mongers, the lunatic fringe, and others who preach a doctrine of malice and intolerance toward their fellow man. These venomous fanatics, whether they are extremists of the left or right, are carriers of a highly infectious disease. They have brought forth the bombs and ignited the flames that have killed decent Americans and even innocent children. They are a national disgrace." We've described the domestic program of the hate groups. How do they feel about the rest of the world? They say, get the United States out of the United Nations and the United Nations out of the United States. They say, stop foreign aid. They say, drop negotiations with other nations. Some of them even say, drop the bomb. Before they do, however, let's see what the right wing is like. It can be compared to a large building, cellar, main floors, and finally the penthouse. Start with the cellar. The American Nazi Party, a familiar symbol of horror. The National States' Rights Party, smear sheets and cheap tabloids. They say, white people and Jews do not think along the same lines. The Jews are destroying the country. Or, it is proven the world over that black and yellow skins are signs of mental and spiritual inferiority. Takes you back a few years, doesn't it? Remember? The master race? Move up to the main section of the building now. Here we find slicker, more expensive-looking publications. American Opinion, magazine of the John Birch Society. Inside, a great lady, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, is slandered. Says writer Westbrook Pegler, that woman was as bad as her idolaters said she was good, as cruel as they said she was benign, as selfish as they said she was generous. There are others, many others. Leaflets and brochures, too. They flood the land by the millions. Tabloids, smear sheets, magazines, leaflets. But that's only the beginning. The extremists spew hate over the airwaves straight into the living rooms of America. This map shows some of the more than 500 communities where daily or weekly right-wing radio programs are carried. Mannion Forum, 313 stations. Lifelines, 324. Dan Smoot, 133. Billy James Hargis, 200. Reverend Carl McIntyre, 527. In all, more than 6,000 extremist broadcasts a week. Now, let's take the elevator to the penthouse. There's a little more sophistication and a little less hysteria. Up here, Human Events and National Review, two influential, widely circulated publications. They attempt a more dignified approach. But the welfare of working people bows to the property rights of business, and the federal government is still the enemy. And so this is the building that houses the extremists. They have neighbors. The neighbors are not hate peddlers, but they share a common goal: reactionary government. AMPAC, the American Medical Political Action Committee. Medical men steadfastly guarding the health and welfare of the American people? Or political medicine men selfishly hoarding their status and privilege at the expense of the people? Their target is defeat of candidates and incumbents who support health care for the elderly under Social Security. In Wisconsin, they lined up with the John Birch Society to support an extreme right-winger opposing Liberal Representative Bob Kastenmeier. In Wyoming, they helped reactionary Millward Simpson defeat Liberal Senator John Hickey. Elsewhere, their support reads, "For reactionaries only." BIPAC, the Business Industry Political Action Committee, a newcomer launched by the National Association of Manufacturers. It too says, only reactionaries need apply. 5 of BIPAC's 13 directors have ties with extremist groups. These groups are all pointing their political efforts in the same direction, to the right. This year and in the years ahead, it will be trying to elect the most reactionary government in the history of our nation. They'll be working to send men to Congress who will vote no on programs to expand the economy and achieve full employment. No on health care for the elderly. No on minimum wage. No on unemployment insurance. No on civil rights. No on fair tax programs. No on public housing. No on improved Social Security. No on aid to education. They're wasting no time. The purge list of liberals is already compiled. Senator Quentin Burdick, North Dakota. Senator Vance Hartke, Indiana. Gore, Tennessee. Hart, Michigan. McCarthy, Minnesota. McGee, Wyoming. Moss, Utah. Muskie, Maine. Williams, New Jersey. Yarborough, Texas. These and other liberal senators and scores of progressive congressmen. In his first major address to the American people as their president, Lyndon B. Johnson said, "Let us put an end to the teaching and preaching of hate and evil and violence. Let us turn away from the fanatics of the far left and the far right, from the apostles of bitterness and bigotry, from those defiant of law and those who pour venom into our nation's bloodstream." This is labor's battle. Today, more than ever before, American labor, which has always been in the forefront of the struggle for social justice and against oppression, must stand firm against the forces committed to our destruction and the weakening of all free institutions. The hate-mongers have learned to use the political process to achieve their ends. And it is in the political arena that the struggle must be waged. The battle can be won, but it is everybody's job. If support of COPE programs was important in the past, it is imperative today. If successful register and vote campaigns were necessary in the past, they are indispensable today. If an alert, informed electorate was desirable in the past, it is a burning need today. Democracy and the survival of free trade unions are at stake. The price of victory is effort. The effort must be ours.